This is another update on the bus sign that I'm building. As you can see, I've got the actual bus blind on there now, but I have had to change the design somewhat. It turns out my clever solution of using these ratcheting sprockets doesn't actually work, and the reason why it doesn't work is actually quite subtle. My thinking originally was, because you've got two rollers that are both moving at the same speed, but the diameter of the rollers is actually changing as the blind goes from one to the other, so they need to rotate at different speeds. Now what I figured was using these ratcheting sprockets, I could arrange it so that only one roller was driven and the other one just freewheeled, because these sprockets work by freewheeling in one direction but turning in the opposite. So I thought that would mean that the driven roller would go in one direction and the opposite roller would just rotate freely. But that doesn't actually work. What happens is as the rollers change size, as soon as the non-driven roller gets to be a larger diameter than the smaller roller, the paper is actually trying to come off it quicker. And what ends up happening is you end up effectively driving the ratchet back the other way. What this was causing was for the chain drive in here would end up getting tensioned up, and the whole thing would get very, very tight, and the paper would end up extremely taut as well. So that idea just wouldn't work. It looks good at first glance, but no, it doesn't work. So I got rid of these and have ended up just putting in straight sprockets. So these are new sprockets now. They're just directly attached to the end of the drums, and they both just rotate at the same speed. So I still have the problem that the two rollers are going to be different sizes, and I thought I could get around this by basically leaving a loop at the bottom here so that the blind is never that taut, and using a rotating rod and basically putting that into the loop so that it's always pulling the blind down. That actually works. That works to keep the tension on the blind, and there's enough slack on the blind that it can change its length as it needs to take up the changes in tension. I put the blind on here to actually test that because I wasn't sure how big a loop I needed to leave, and I thought, okay, I'll put that on there and I'll give it a try, and I'll try it without this rod in there because it does tend to flap around a bit. I was expecting to have to make a sort of guide for this thing so that it could move up and down but not move side to side or in and out. But I thought, well, let's try it with it on there with it a bit slack and see what happens. The other thing I've done is tidy up all my wiring, so I don't get shocks off the switch anymore, because I've got snubber diodes across the relay coils. These are actually the limit switches, which are wired into the circuit but not mechanically hooked up, so they don't do anything at the moment. But we can actually test this thing out now. That's basically one end of the blind. You can see there's still a little bit of slack in it, but we can now rotate it all the way to the other end. You can see there's always a little bit of slack in the blind, but there's actually enough weight in the blind that it holds itself fairly vertical. And that's back to the other end. So now it's not too tight, but it's hanging pretty flat. So I think I can basically get away with just leaving a little bit of slack on the roller, and there's enough play in it there that it never actually takes up enough of it to become tight. And the thing is basically working pretty well just as it is. Of course there'll be glass on the front and the cover, so you'll only actually see a little bit of the sign, so you only actually see two lines effectively at a time. You can see here how much slack there is in the blind, but the cover will be right to where the floor is here, so that sort of slack won't actually matter. It just plays it out and winds it back up as it needs to. But that seems to work fairly well now. What I need to do is build the mechanism to power the limit switches so that it stops at either end of the blind, and then build a cover. But that turned out to be a lot simpler than I thought. I think I overthought it originally. So we'll see how it goes like this. I'll test it for a while and make sure the tension remains the same and the blind stays straight and that kind of thing, but it's looking pretty good so far.